All we want is fast, reliable autofocus that stays locked onto our target, but sometimes it just doesn't hit the mark. So let me show you in this video a few key settings that will completely change how your camera performs and will give you amazing results every single time, no matter whether you're shooting Canon, Nikon or Sony. I'm Wegener, and for over 20 years I've been a professional photographer capturing unique bird photos and videos and teaching all of you to create your own masterpieces. In this video I will show you a few crucial autofocus settings to change, but if you need help to set up your camera as a whole or want to learn more about these settings in detail, make sure to check out my Canon, Sony and Nikon setup guides that are linked for you down there in the description. And I'm also providing you with my camera setup file so you can install all my settings with just one click. No matter what brand I use, I set up most mirrorless cameras in a similar way, and that starts with double or triple back button autofocus. Separating the autofocusing from the image taking is greatly beneficial in the field and gives you much greater control over your camera. I know not everyone loves back button autofocusing and you don't have to use it, but I think the benefits definitely outweigh the disadvantage of having to retrain your fingers. It may take a week or two to get used to the new setup, but what you gain in extra control over the camera will not only make you a better photographer, but will also guarantee you better images in the field. To have that full control over our camera, we want to set single point or spot autofocus without tracking as our base autofocusing mode. That allows us to focus on whatever we want, whenever we want, similar to the DSLR autofocus. And then on the second button, typically the AF on button, I want to assign whole or wide or auto area AF tracking, where the camera tracks and finds a subject all over our viewfinder. Of the three big brands, the easiest to set up is definitely Canon. All we need to do is deactivate shutter button autofocusing, then set spot autofocus ideally without tracking as our base autofocusing mode. And then we navigate to the custom button menu and assign the AE lock or star button to metering and AF on. So that then triggers our base spot autofocus. And then we assign eye tracking autofocus to the AF on button. And that already gives us a fantastic, super fast and reliable 1-2 autofocus punch. Now we could customize some of these buttons a bit further, but I think for most this is already a fantastic setup. After that, we basically just have to make a few little tweaks to the autofocusing cases and we're ready to go. If you have an older camera like an R5, you want to go in and choose case 1 and set both of the parameters to -1. That has given me fantastic results in the field. And on the newer cameras like the R5 Mark II or the R1, I like to use the auto case and set it either to 0 or +1, which has also given me fantastic autofocusing results. Setting up Nikon bodies is also quite easy, but one issue with Nikon is that the different autofocusing modes like 3D tracking or wide area perform very different in different shooting situations. And there will be cases where you might need to use 1, 2 or 3 different autofocusing modes to perfectly focus within the one scene. So instead of assigning just 2 buttons, I usually like to assign 3 or 4 different autofocusing modes to different buttons on the Nikon bodies. To set that up on our Nikon bodies, we first deactivate shutter button focusing. Then we also set single point autofocus as our base autofocusing mode. And in this menu, we also assign the subject to detect, which in my case will be birds. From there, we navigate to the custom buttons menu. And here we assign different autofocusing modes to the different buttons, starting with the AF on button. On the AF on button, I choose AF area mode and AF on. And in there, I select auto area AF. That now gives me the whole area tracking on the AF on button. Next, I go to the display button and select AF on for it. That means whenever I press the display button now, my base autofocusing mode, the spot or single point autofocus, will focus. And then I toggle to the 2 front buttons. And to the top front button, I assign AF area mode and AF on and choose 3D tracking. And then I do the same for the second front button. And here I choose AF area mode and AF on and then choose a custom wide area. And we can actually adjust the custom wide area in the first menu. And I like to here choose a fairly long or narrow area, which is great for birds and flight tracking. So you can see this is a setup that's a little bit more involved, but it's the best way I've found to use the different options we have available on our Nikon bodies. I wish there was one mode that was better than all the other modes, but it seems like depending on your situation, auto area AF will work most of the time, but there will also be cases, for instance, where 3D tracking is superior for perch birds, or where a small wide area is just better for birds in flight. So most of the time I always default to just using the display button with the spot autofocus or the AF on button with the auto area AF. But if both of these modes don't properly track my subject, I use the two front buttons and find a mode that will finally work. At least though the rest of the autofocusing parameters already work pretty well on the standard settings with Nikon, we don't really have to make any major changes here. On Sony, setting up double back button autofocus could actually be super simple, but it's not, because Sony makes us jump through a few hoops to assign the wide area autofocus tracking onto the AF on button. To get started with assigning our custom buttons, we first need to register an autofocusing area, which we can do in the purple menu. So in the purple menu number 2, I select wide as my focus area. And then we scroll down and select the autofocus registration and set that to on. And now what we have to do is basically just half tap the shutter button so we get out of the menu like if we wanted to take some photos, and then press the FN button on the back of the camera for a few seconds until you see the message that says autofocus area has been registered. And now that means that the white area that we have selected is registered as our focus area that we can later assign to a button. So now we go back to the purple menu and change the focus area from white to spot S, which is our base autofocus. I hope you're still following, because this is definitely a little bit more involved, but I'm also showing this in great detail in my Sony setup guides. And then we can navigate to the yellow custom button menu. And here I first assign AF on to the AEL button, which then powers our spot S base autofocus. After that, I go to the AF on button and I assign registered autofocus area and AF on. And the registered autofocus area is the one that we previously registered, which is white. And that gives us a beautiful 1-2 punch for Sony cameras. The AEL button will power our base spot autofocus, and the AF on button will give us the wide area tracking where the camera tracks our subject all over the viewfinder. On Sony, the subject tracking and autofocus parameters are also a little bit more involved. On one hand, it's great that there's so many different options and settings, but it also makes it a little bit harder to find the perfect settings that work for a majority of the time. And what many people don't know, if you actually go to the bird subject detection mode and click right, there is another menu that gives you again a few new settings and parameters that you can change specific to bird tracking. And on the screen now you can see a few options that have worked very well for me on the A9 III and the A1. And depending on your situations and what you're shooting in the field, you may actually have to change some of these settings from time to time. Because the Sony wide area autofocus sometimes has a hard time to find your target and get stuck on a leaf, for instance, I'm also assigning the custom button 2 on top of the camera to focus area, which then allows me to cycle through different focusing areas very quickly. And for instance, if the wide area doesn't work and the spot area is too small, I can quickly toggle to like a medium-sized zone, which then might help me to stay on my target. Taking great raw files in the field is step 1. But step 2 that's equally important is to learn a good editing workflow that allows you to edit all those raw images and make them shine. And this is why I developed my Lightroom and next generation Photoshop masterclasses. In my classes, I teach you step by step and in easy to follow chapters all the important tools and techniques you need to know to be able to get great results from even your most difficult to edit raw files. But of course you won't just be watching, because I'm also providing you with my own raw files so you can edit right alongside me. And if you're not sure if my classes are worth it or the right fit for you, check out some of the amazing reviews that I receive on a daily basis from many happy students who I've helped to transform their editing lives, who now get great results with ease and actually enjoy editing their photos. So if you want to learn an easy to follow workflow that you can apply to all your raw files and get great results every single time, make sure to check out my masterclasses down there in the description. I know that will help you a lot. Recently, I've also been assigning another button on all my mirrorless cameras, either an emergency high image quality or action button. And the idea is that I can press that button, and while I hold it, I can switch to a completely different set of settings than the settings that I've currently dialed into my camera. For instance, I often have high ISOs and high shutter speeds dialed in to be ready if the birds are taking off or fast action is happening. But if a bird lands close to me now, I don't have good settings if I want to take a portrait of it, because that high ISO will make it quite grainy. So then I set up an emergency high image quality button that gives me auto ISO with a smaller aperture and a low shutter speed, which then also results in a lower ISO, giving me a much better image quality while I hold that button pressed so I can take a few portraits, and when I let it go, I instantly revert back to my fast settings, and if anything action is happening or the bird's taking off, I'm ready to shoot again. And of course, you can also do the reverse. If you're typically shooting at low ISOs and low shutter speeds, you can set up an emergency action button. And the idea is, as long as you hold down that button, the camera will instantly jump to much higher ISOs, shoot wide open, and give you a much higher shutter speed so you can freeze action while holding that button. To assign this function to a button, we have to go into the menu, and for Canon, I typically like to assign it to the AF point selection button on the far right of the camera. And in the menu, I need to go to register recall shooting functions and then set in there my settings of parameters that I want to use. On Nikon, it's a little bit harder to set this up because I've already assigned so many different autofocusing modes to the different buttons. So we can either assign it to a lens function button or decide that we want to remove one of the autofocusing modes and replace it with an emergency action or high image quality buttons. Typically, I would use one of the two front buttons for that. And in the Nikon menu, we have to look for recall shooting functions. And then in there, we can set the parameters that we want to happen when we press that button. And on Sony cameras, we go to the red shooting menu, go to register custom shooting set, and then go to recall custom hold 1 and click right, where we can dial in all the settings that we want to happen for recall custom shoot 1. And then, for instance, assign the video record button in stills mode to recall custom hold 1. And then whenever we press that button, it will jump to our new set of settings. It would make this video way too long to talk through all the settings and subsettings you can set up for the emergency button, but I talk about it in great detail in my setup guides, and I've also made a separate video about it. One thing that I like to turn on all brands is constant manual autofocusing. By default, this is often turned off, which means if you need to manually interfere with your autofocus while focusing, you can't. So I like to turn that on, which means whenever I need to, I can manually interfere and bring my focus back onto target, which is very helpful. For instance, if your autofocusing is stuck on the background, you can quickly just turn the manual focus ring and make it jump back onto your target. What I also like to do on all my mirrorless cameras is to shoot in compressed RAWs. The loss in image quality is negligible, but what it gives us is smaller RAW files, which in return don't exactly help the autofocus, but give us a much larger buffer, which means that we can hold down the shutter button for longer before we hit the buffer, which means we have a bigger chance of capturing that crucial action moment or the best possible pose of a bird in flight. And then there's one nasty autofocusing mode that we have to change on Canon and Nikon cameras. For some reason, this setting is by default allowing us to always lose the focusing position whenever our camera goes to sleep or we turn it off. So if you're in a blind, your camera goes to sleep and you turn it back on, your whole viewfinder will be blurry even though you had pre-focus on the perch, which is super annoying, so we need to change it. On Canon, that setting is called retract lens on power off, and we need to turn that off. Which means now whenever the camera goes to sleep or we turn it off and turn it back on, we're still focused on what we had previously focused on. And on Nikon, we have to go to the menu and select Save Focus Position and make sure that that is set to on. Because without it, the camera will also defocus every single time we're turning it off or it goes to sleep, which is super annoying. Now this feature is there because there are certain lenses that actually protrude out when you're focusing, and to not damage these lenses, that is on like a Canon 35 1.8. But for most lenses, especially long lenses, this is just a horrible feature and in my opinion should probably be set to off by default. I didn't say it specifically in this video, but of course if we want to track a moving subject, even if it's a bird just moving on a perch, we want to make sure that we set our camera to like servo or continuous autofocus tracking. And lastly, I'm also always making sure that my camera is set to release priority. If it's set to focus priority, it means that the camera will only take an image if it thinks that your subject is in focus. In theory, this sounds good, but what can happen if you're shooting a burst of images? Your camera will suddenly not fire, which throws you off and you may lose your subject from the viewfinder. So I'd rather have a few out of focus images in a burst of images, but whenever I press the shutter button, the camera also takes a photo. And with that, I'm hoping that you're on your way to capturing in focus and razor sharp images every time you're out there. You may also want to check out another autofocusing video that I recently posted where I show you crucial field techniques you need to master in order to help your autofocusing systems to succeed and to get those razor sharp images we all want. And now I would love to hear from you guys in the comments as well. What have been your biggest struggles with autofocus? Is it the camera settings? Is it using it in the field? Is it a bit of everything? Let me know down there in the comments. Also give me a thumbs up for the video. Check out my channel membership, masterclasses and setup guides. And of course, hit that subscribe button so we can grow our community, and I'll see you in another video very soon. Bye.